Morning. Not yet. Now you can.
Good morning and welcome to Indy Boomer Magazine. I'm Mary Pat McKee, and this morning I am sitting here with Ann Poindexter from Altman, Poindexter and Wyatt. It is an attorney firm, legal firm. What's the proper terminology? Legal firm?
Law firm.
Law firm. Gosh, it's early in the morning, I guess. Just kidding. Before we get started, though, wanted to let everybody know what you see on the screen there is the March issue of Indy Boomer Magazine. That is Two Chicks and a Hammer. And you may pick that up at any Kroger or Marsh store in Indianapolis and the surrounding areas. We're also at Marion County Libraries. We're at Prime Life Enrichment, The Social, all over town. So you can pick those up in several locations. We also would like to thank Logan Street Signs and Banners and Noblesville Trophies for the opportunity to have the show. So we could sit here and talk about things that are important to boomers and their parents. And that is what Ann and I are going to do this morning.
Yes, we are.
You always have good legal advice, important advice that I think, it's one of those things you really don't think about until you need it. And then when you do need it, you don't always know all the questions to ask. Mm-hmm. True. So what we're going to talk about today, well, a couple different things, but one would be beneficiaries. Am I saying that right?
Beneficiary designations.
Designations. So explain to us what exactly does that mean?
Okay. Well, most people have an awareness that you can have a beneficiary designation on certain kinds of assets. I mean, life insurance is a classic example. Mm-hmm. You can name your beneficiary.
Trust,
you can name a beneficiary. But, over time, and I don't want to say exactly how old I am, but, I've been practicing law for a while.
A couple of years.
And we've had new opportunities for beneficiary designations where people are starting to make all of these individual beneficiary designations where these assets transfer directly. Mm-hmm. And so people are saying, I don't need an estate plan. I don't need a will. I don't need a trust because I named a beneficiary on my life insurance. I named a beneficiary on my bank account. Bank accounts, you can do POD, pay on death. That's a beneficiary designation.
I did not know that.
I made a beneficiary designation on my brokerage account. TOD, transfer on death. That's a beneficiary designation.
I should be writing these down.
And, here's one that a lot of people don't know about yet. But you can do a new deed for real estate. You can make real estate transfer on death. So I can take the deed to my house. I can prepare a new deed where I transfer it to myself, but I include the language transfer on death to you. So when I die, if I still owned my house, it passes by that beneficiary designation, transfer on death to you.
Quick question. If you have a mortgage, though, that doesn't work.
No.
You have to own the home.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, well, it does work. It transfers it, but you're stuck with the mortgage, too. So.
Okay. Well.
So here's one of the issues that we're seeing over and over. Mm-hmm. People say, I don't need an estate plan. Mm-hmm. Well, I beg to differ. If you've made all of those beneficiary designations, you have an estate plan. The issue is whether that is an effective and proper estate plan. And so here's why I say that. Couple of examples where we're seeing some real problems. Mm-hmm. I have clients that are really fairly knowledgeable. They've read, they've studied, they've made all of these different beneficiary designations, and literally everything when they die is transferring automatically because of the beneficiary designation.
And you have to fill out paperwork in order to do so, correct?
Right. Okay. Just like your life insurance beneficiary designation.
Okay.
So if you do that and you die, how do we pay your bills? How do we pay for the funeral? How do we pay for the last medical bills? What if you owe taxes?
Don't you always?
If somebody died and you and I are the two beneficiaries, and you got one bank account and I got the stock account, and that was the only assets, then why wouldn't I look at you and say, you pay the funeral bill? And you might look at me and say, no, you pay the funeral bill. And that's in fact what's happening, is sometimes we have beneficiaries that don't agree, don't get along, or think that the other one got more in a different account than I got.
Right.
And so we don't have cash, we don't have an estate, because all of those assets went by beneficiary designation.
Right.
So we have a problem paying for the funeral bill, the medical bills, or taxes. Now, here's something that people don't know, and that is that a creditor can open up an estate. So if I'm owed money by the person who died, I can go into court and open up the estate.
Now, when you say open up the estate, is an estate just a piece of paper?
Well, it's a number of pieces of paper.
Oh, I'm sure it
but
is,
yes, in essence, it's getting the judge to order that an estate needs to be opened for someone who's died. So there's two types of estates, if someone died with a will or without a will.
Right.
But if I'm the creditor and I am owed money and nobody else has opened up an estate, I can go into court as the creditor and ask the judge to let me open the estate, and then I can go to at least some of those beneficiaries and I can demand that they pay back the money.
Wow.
Now that's shocking to beneficiaries. How, as a beneficiary, would you have any idea that a creditor can open up an estate and come to you for money?
I learned it today. I didn't know.
How would an average beneficiary know that?
Yeah.
And there are two kinds of assets that a creditor can't claw back into an estate. And the two kinds of assets that are really protected under the law, they can't get life insurance.
Okay.
And they can't get retirement assets.
Okay.
But the
They could get
example,
the stock, they could get the house, they could get...
right, but the example I just said of what you and I inherited, the bank account and the securities account,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
If there are no other assets to pay those creditor claims, you can get those back into the estate. And so we're seeing some new litigation, if you will, that is really disheartening. Beneficiaries have lost a friend or a loved one.
Right.
They think they've inherited something. Maybe they've even spent part of it or made plans for it.
Wow, yeah.
And then they get notified that there's an estate opened and a demand for the money, and then they have to go see a lawyer to find out. And
Sounds like a costly expense.
it can be.
Yeah.
It can be a costly expense.
Why would people do that? I mean, why would people set up beneficiaries and not just do a will? Because don't you, in a will, assign beneficiaries?
Well, a will is a different method of assigning beneficiaries.
Okay.
But it's important to understand also that if you have a direct beneficiary designation attached to a piece of property, so if I have the deed to the house and it says transfer on death,
Right.
then the will, even if you have one, is not going to cover that, because the deed in and of itself.
Okay.
So any property that has a specific instruction attached to it is going to transfer by that specific instruction.
And not, so that wouldn't be in
and
the
not
will.
by the will.
Okay. Now, does a beneficiary, that's hard to say, designation, does it override a will? Or vice versa? Or how's that?
Well, the beneficiary designation, if it's attached to an asset,
Okay.
in a sense, really does override the will.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
if you were a card player, you would say it's trump.
Okay.
Because the beneficiary designation attached to an asset controls that asset.
Okay.
So I could have a will that says that real estate goes to Joe Smith, but if the deed says transfer on death to you,
Right.
you win
Okay.
because the deed controls that asset.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, if Joe Smith died, or if you died before I did, then the will would still let it transfer to Joe because
Okay.
this beneficiary designation on the piece of property isn't effective. That beneficiary is dead.
Let me complicate it a little more.
Okay.
What if the person that has the deed, it's a TOD? I like this new acronym. I'm going to use it. Nobody's going to know what I'm talking about. But anyway, but
They'll
say,
learn. They'll learn.
Yeah, they will because I'll have to tell them. But so say I die, but I had a TOD to, let's say, my daughter. So if I die, the person that deeded that to me hasn't died. Would this other person that's in the will still get it, or because I already? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
It's like twice removed.
Right. So your daughter isn't going to get it if this deed says it just goes to you and it has no other language on
Okay.
it.
Okay. So I couldn't transfer it to her because I'd have to get it first. I'd
Right,
have to
and you
acquire
didn't get it. And that's an important point about a TOD deed. It's not any different conceptually than your life insurance beneficiary designation. I mean,
Okay.
you know that as long as you're alive and as long as you're legally competent, you can change your life insurance beneficiary.
Okay.
You can get mad at somebody and change it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You can do the same thing on those transfer on death deeds. It's a
Okay.
little more complicated to do a deed and record it, but conceptually it's the same thing. You can keep changing it
Right.
because the beneficiary has no rights unless or until you die.
Right. Okay. Well, do you think people are doing that to cut corners or save money or something? Not doing the will or the actual whole estate planning?
I think that some people are trying to save money and think that, I don't need to spend the money to go to a lawyer and do a will. And so, yes, I think there's a part of it. I think a part of it is just allow understand. It's just kind of a mixed bag.
Well, if somebody were to come to you and say, hey, I want to do all these, different beneficiary designations to people, wouldn't you, as an attorney, say, okay, that's great, but let's do the whole shebang? I mean, do you see what I mean?
Right. And what I say to people is, yes, I mean, go ahead and do that, but let's talk about what you want to do first.
Right.
And by the way, let's at least do a simple will, just in case. My example on the deed was a good one.
Right.
What if that person predeceases you and you haven't gone back and changed that deed? Let's at least have a simple will that
That's a good
picks up
point.
something you forgot, something you inherited, your lottery winnings,
Right.
whatever. So let's have a simple will, but then let's talk about those beneficiary designations to make sure you're very thoughtful. Because here's another issue with beneficiary designations. If I'm married but I don't have any children, then logically I might put my husband as the beneficiary and he might put me.
Right.
If we die in a common accident,
Right.
but I survive, which I always tell him I will, at least one
that a
day
threat?
longer than he does,
Yeah.
then I inherit everything. Because I'm the beneficiary and I survived a day.
Right.
So think about that. We had no children, but we both had living parents, we both had siblings,
Right.
and all of our joint assets are going to go to my family.
is that how it works? That was my next
Because I
question, yeah.
survived 1 day longer. Now,
So is that what happens though? So if you just survived 1 day longer, it goes to your family and not his family?
yes,
Oh wow.
and people
I
don't
remember to stay alive one more day.
and people don't necessarily think about that in a
Oh,
beneficiary
who would?
designation.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes in a will, and people don't always want to do this, and we don't always, but sometimes in a will, we say, as long as my spouse survives me by 30 days or more, or 60 days or more, or,
Okay.
whatever else, to prevent that 1 or 2 day, issue.
Scenario, yeah.
Right.
Which has got to be rare, but I'm sure it happens. Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, that's excellent information. I want to ask you, and we've talked about it before, what is probate?
Probate is the process of taking the will over to court and getting the estate opened. People also talk about probate in the sense of just opening up the estate. And the one thing I'd like people to understand is that probate is not horrible. It is simply not.
It does have a bad reputation.
I know it has a bad reputation, but there are some benefits to probate, and those benefits are that it sets a distinct timeline for creditors to come in and file their claims. They only have 3 months. So after 3 months, creditors' claims are barred. And I'm here to tell
I
you,
didn't know that.
as much estate practice as I do, there are a number of times where they don't get filed on time, and they are barred. They cannot
Well, maybe they
collect
don't
it.
even know the person died.
Well, we have to send them notice if we know of them, and we have to publish notice in the
Okay,
newspaper.
Okay, sure.
But sometimes they don't get their claims filed on
Yeah.
time. So it sets distinct timelines for the creditors to
Right.
file their claims. It gives a forum if there's going to be a dispute between the beneficiaries. Another benefit of probate is that there is a forum for settling it in a family settlement.
Right.
There's an opportunity to go mediate it and then present it to the court
could
for
be
a
good.
settlement. And that can sometimes be very beneficial.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The last thing that I want people to understand about probate is probate in and of itself doesn't cause a loss of a huge amount of assets to taxes or necessarily to attorney's fees.
Okay.
If you have litigation for 2 years, yes, there's going to be lots of attorney's fees. But for the average probate estate, there is simply not, based upon the hours that the attorneys spend. And if there's not a lot of dispute there, then you got the benefit of the creditor's claims being cut off in a distinct timeline. You got a forum for resolving any disputes.
Right.
And you can get it done in a very efficient timeline, not the years that people think that it takes. The average estate simply doesn't. So there are some benefits that can be had.
Well,
by probate.
I think that's a subject we need to talk more about another time.
And we can do that.
Time flies when we're always talking. I can't even believe it. Hey, thank you guys for watching. Once again, we want everybody to pick up a copy of the March issue of Indy Boomer Magazine at any Kroger or Marsh store. Also, remember on Sundays we have Boomer TV with Patty Spittler on Channel 8 at 10:30 in the morning. And again, very good information. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks. I can't believe that we talked for 15 minutes.